Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something as dreamy as it is deadly, romance in the Middle Ages. But before you imagine candlelit halls and roses at dawn, let me be real with you. Falling in love back then wasn't just dramatic, it was downright dangerous. Like, you probably won't survive this kind of dangerous. We're talking scandal, sword fights, prison, and even executions, all for a little kiss or a secret note passed under a chapel pew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a world where love isn't a fairy tale, it's a minefield. It's the early 12th century. The Middle Ages are still trudging through mud-stained boots and ironclad morality, and you're growing up in a world where everyone already knows who you're going to marry by the time you can barely spell your own name. Not because of compatibility or butterflies, but because your family made a deal, usually involving land, alliances, or livestock. So love? That's not on the official menu. But here's the twist. Despite all the practicality and pressure, people still fall in love, like deep, heart-wrenching, bad decision-making kind of love. And that tension between the real and the romantic births, one of the most iconic and misunderstood cultural phenomena of the era, courtly love. Now, imagine this. You're a noblewoman. You're technically married, sure, but your husband is always off at war or just disinterested in anything that isn't hunting boar. One day, a young knight, maybe a bit too poetic for his own good, comes around singing about your hair and how your smile could conquer dragons. He leaves little poems with suspiciously familiar metaphors. He catches your eye at the feast and raises his goblet in your direction. You pretend not to notice, but you totally do. That's courtly love. It's all about admiration, longing, and supposedly unconsummated affection. The ideal was pure and noble. He worships you from afar, writes songs about your beauty, swears fealty to your favor in battle. It's like emotional yoga, all the stretching, none of the action. The whole thing is supposed to stay platonic. But let's be honest, sometimes it didn't. Here's where it gets spicy. These little romantic games weren't just risky. They could literally kill you. You see, most marriages were contracts, and breaching them, especially if you're a woman, meant shame, legal action, or death. Even just entertaining the idea of someone else, even in poetry, could be taken as proof of adultery. And that's not a charge people took lightly. Meanwhile, troubadours, the medieval equivalent of TikTok sad boys, traveled from court to court singing songs about tragic longing and the noble pain of forbidden love. Their songs were the era's rom-coms, except they usually ended with the knight dead in a ditch or the lady banished to a convent. Still, the whole thing caught on, especially in places like southern France and northern Italy. Young nobles started believing in the idea that love was supposed to hurt, that suffering for someone out of reach was the highest emotional achievement. You don't just love someone, you adore them, ache for them, compose an entire lute ballad about the way their shadow looked at dusk. This may sound poetic, but here's the problem. It messes with the already precarious balance of power. In a society where every marriage is a chess move and every flirtation could destabilize years of diplomacy, love becomes dangerous, not just personally, but politically. If the count's daughter falls for the blacksmith's apprentice, it's not a Hallmark movie. It's a scandal that could result in bloodshed. And don't get too cozy with the idea that men had it easier. They didn't. A young knight caught making eyes at the baron's wife could find himself on the wrong end of a lance or sent to a monastery faster than you can say unrequited. Love in this age is a high-stakes gamble where the odds are rigged, and the house usually wins. One historical fact. The concept of courtly love really gained steam in Eleanor of Aquitaine's court, where poets and thinkers romanticized idealized affection. Eleanor herself was married to 2 kings and had a complicated love life that might have inspired half the drama in medieval poetry. She helped shape this cultural movement. But even with her high status, she wasn't immune to political blowback. At one point, she was imprisoned by her own husband, King Henry II, for allegedly encouraging their sons to rebel. Love and politics, never clean. Now, here's a fringe gem for you. Some medieval love manuals existed, actual guides on how to woo someone properly. One of the weirdest examples comes from Andreas Capellanus' The Art of Courtly Love, which includes bizarre advice like, love cannot exist in the married state, and outlines a very specific class-based approach to seduction. Picture a medieval self-help book written by someone who clearly never had a healthy relationship. And of course, no good bedtime story is complete without a little historical debate. Scholars still argue whether courtly love was ever really practiced or if it was all just a poetic fantasy. Some say it was a genuine code followed by the aristocracy. Others claim it was mostly literary make-believe, a kind of socially acceptable way to talk about longing without ever admitting to scandal. Was it real? Was it just fanfiction of the nobility? The truth probably lives somewhere in between a rose garden and a locked tower. So here you are, surrounded by castles and codes, navigating a world where falling in love isn't just emotionally risky. It's legally, socially, and physically dangerous. You've got songs being written about your eyes, rumors whispering through the halls, and a husband who might not take kindly to poetry involving your dimples. Sleep well knowing this. In the Middle Ages, Cupid didn't just carry arrows. He carried consequences. You're walking through the cloistered halls of a medieval castle, damp stone underfoot, and a draft that's always just cold enough to make you question your life choices. You're not royalty, yet you're well-connected enough to be in the thick of noble life. And tonight, someone's whispering about another scandal. One that's already got 2 maids dismissed and a knight summoned before the Lord himself. The charge? A secret liaison. Translation: forbidden love. Here's the hard truth. If you fall for someone you're not supposed to, it's not just frowned upon, it's dangerous. As in, your life could end painfully and publicly. Romantic relationships outside of marriage weren't just disapproved of, they were criminal. Affairs, especially among the noble class, could lead to charges of adultery, treason, or worse. And it didn't matter if it was mutual or not. Once the rumor mill got hold of flirtation, the consequences started snowballing. Let's paint the picture. You're a young lady of the court, technically married to a man twice your age, chosen for you because of his property holdings. He's always away or drunk, maybe both. Then there's the new squire, earnest, poetic, impossibly blue-eyed. You pass each other in the hall. One day he drops a glove. You pick it up and your fingers brush. The moment barely lasts a second, but someone sees. Now everything gets dangerous. The maid who spotted you? She's loyal to your husband. She whispers to the steward, who tells the chaplain, who tells the lady of the next estate during evening prayer. Within days, the whole castle knows. And in the Middle Ages, where surveillance was basically gossip with better acoustics, that's all it took to start an avalanche. Adultery wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a legal offense. If you're a woman caught in an affair, your husband could legally kill you. That's not melodrama. It's codified in several medieval law systems, including Anglo-Saxon and Frankish traditions. Men could also be punished, but their consequences were often lighter. For women, the stakes were existential. You weren't just cheating on your husband. You were endangering the family line, possibly birthing an heir that wasn't his. And in a society obsessed with bloodlines, that was nuclear-level betrayal. Of course, sometimes it wasn't the husband you had to worry about. If you were sleeping with someone from another noble house, your love affair might look an awful lot like espionage. That could mean imprisonment in a tower, literal dungeon time, or death by execution. Remember Isabeau of Bavaria, Queen of France, accused of numerous affairs during her husband's mental illness? Some believe the rumors were politically motivated, but even unproven whispers nearly ruined her reign. No one was safe. Now let's flip the coin. Say you're a knight and you fall in love with the Lord's daughter. Hers is a name you can't even speak without choking on your own ambition, but you do speak it. In fact, you write it in a poem that you slip in her psalter. Very smooth. Except now her father knows, and he's not flattered. You're accused of dishonoring her. And since she's technically property until married off, her honor reflects directly on his. If he's merciful, you're sent to fight in a war. If not, you're found hanging by dawn. Love can't compete with power. And it wasn't just the nobility playing these high-stakes games. Even among peasants and townsfolk, romantic scandals could turn ugly fast. In small communities, people lived on top of each other physically and socially. Everyone knew everyone's business. A miller's daughter sneaking into the woods with a shepherd? If caught, they could be publicly whipped, forced to confess in church, or shamed in front of the entire village. Imagine standing barefoot before your parish priest while your neighbors hurl cabbage and judgment. So romantic. Here's a historical fact for your nightmares. In 1395, Margery of Hereford was accused of adultery after a neighbor claimed to see a man leave her cottage late at night. Her punishment? She was forced to stand outside the church in a sackcloth dress while the priest read her sins aloud. And that was a mild sentence. Others were branded, mutilated, or worse. But don't get the idea that all this was always about justice. Sometimes accusations were strategic. If a lord wanted to dispose of an inconvenient wife or an ambitious rival, a whispered allegation of a romantic indiscretion could be a useful tool. Love became weaponized, twisted into a political dagger. The bedroom wasn't private, it was a battlefield. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some medieval towns held love courts. Yes, real ones. They didn't dole out legal sentences, but noblewomen would gather to judge cases of romantic suffering. Think of it as aristocratic group therapy mixed with a fanfic forum. These courts would decide whether a knight's love was true or whether a lady had been cruel in rejecting him. Totally dramatic, totally non-binding, and totally unable to protect anyone from real-world consequences. Of course, modern scholars still argue about how common these lethal outcomes were. Did people really die that often for love, or are we just obsessed with the juicy outliers? Some historians say that actual executions for affairs were rare and exaggerated in court literature. Others argue they were more common but underreported, especially for lower-class offenders. Either way, the cultural fear of punishment was real. In the Middle Ages, fear was half the law. So here you are, in love and surrounded by land deals, legal traps, and jealous whispers. You write a note, you sneak a kiss, you dream a life you can't have. But in this world, even a whisper of affection can cost you everything. Is it worth it? That's the question medieval lovers had to ask themselves every day. And often, they answered yes, even when it meant ruin. You wake up to the sound of clanging iron. Someone's forging horseshoes outside your window. It's a reminder that even love has to make way for business here. You live in a world where marriages aren't rooted in passion, romance, or even basic compatibility. Nope. In the Middle Ages, marriage is a transaction, a financial merger, a carefully calculated political strategy wrapped in a church ceremony and a lot of fabric. Whether you're born to a noble family or a modest farming household, your love life is already mapped out long before you're old enough to feel anything resembling infatuation. Your parents don't sit you down with a cup of tea and ask how you feel about the kid down the road. Instead, they negotiate your future like a merchant haggling over a barrel of salted fish. Dowries are discussed. Land is weighed. Political alliances are drawn up. The goal isn't happiness. It's survival, stability, influence. Love? That's an optional side quest, and a dangerous one at that. Picture this. You're a young nobleman, maybe 16, and you've just been told you're to marry a girl from a powerful neighboring family. You met her exactly once. She was 10 at the time and very concerned about her pet hawk. You're expected to wed her when she turns 12 or 13, which is perfectly normal by medieval standards. The union will secure access to her family's vineyards, ensuring a steady wine supply and a stronger military alliance. You don't get a say. If you protest, you're told to think of the family legacy. Love is for songs, not strategy. Meanwhile, if you're the bride, things aren't any better. You're being handed over like a diplomatic token. Your education has focused more on managing a household and surviving childbirth than on poetry or dreams. The wedding night isn't about romance. It's about consummation. Because until that's done, the marriage isn't considered legally binding. And if it isn't consummated, both families could call the whole thing off, which would bring shame, debts, and possibly open conflict. So, you play your role. You smile at the feast. You wear the heavy gown. You endure the toasts and the stares. And inside, maybe you're aching for someone else, someone your heart picked, not your parents. That's the cruel paradox of the Middle Ages. Marriage is everywhere, but love is usually somewhere else. People get married to survive and fall in love in spite of it. It's almost expected that if you do feel something real, it'll happen outside your marriage, which again makes things very, very complicated. Historically, this dynamic left room for all kinds of quiet rebellion. Secret lovers, emotional affairs, longing glances during banquets. People found ways to feel something real in the cracks between duty and expectation. Of course, some took it a step further, trying to annul their arranged marriages to pursue love elsewhere. But here's where things get spicy and sad. Getting an annulment wasn't like clicking unsubscribe. It was a grueling legal and spiritual process overseen by the church, often requiring you to prove that your marriage was invalid from the start. Reasons included impotence. Yes, you had to prove that in public. Consanguinity, being too closely related, which, let's be honest, was common among nobles, or coercion. But the church wasn't exactly eager to unravel alliances forged through holy matrimony. If your union benefited powerful families or political factions, your pleas fell on deaf ears. More than once, people trying to escape loveless marriages were accused of heresy or excommunicated altogether. Here's a historical gem. Eleanor of Aquitaine, yes, her again, actually had her first marriage to Louis VII annulled on grounds of consanguinity. But everyone suspected the real reason was that she just couldn't stand him and had her eye on Henry of Anjou, soon to be Henry II of England. It worked out for her, sort of, but even queens had to bend the rules and risk scandal to follow their hearts. But let's not forget the commoners. Among peasants, things were a little looser, but not by much. Marriages were still arranged, often by fathers and village elders, and economic considerations were front and center. A good match wasn't about chemistry. It was about cows or land, or sometimes just proximity. You might get lucky and actually like your spouse, but if you didn't, tough. Divorce wasn't an option. And if you were caught straying, the punishments could be brutal, especially if you were a woman. Here's a quirky nugget. Some regions had rituals that mocked failed or loveless marriages. In parts of France, if a couple didn't consummate their marriage within a certain time, villagers would gather outside their home and bang pots and pans in an obnoxious, very public shaming. It was called chivalry, and it was the medieval version of getting roasted by your neighbors for being a disappointment. And just because love wasn't officially part of marriage doesn't mean people didn't crave it. You'd find it in songs, in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, in the careful stitching of a lover's initials into a handkerchief. People still wanted to love and be loved. They just didn't have the institutional support for it. If anything, the danger and impossibility made love feel even more urgent, more desperate, like you had to seize it quickly before the world took it away. One scholarly debate that still floats around like smoke in a candlelit hall. Were people really as emotionally detached from marriage as the documents suggest? Some researchers argue that we've overestimated the coldness of arranged unions, that affection, companionship, even love could grow over time. Others say that's wishful thinking and the system was fundamentally hostile to romance from the start. Maybe both are true. Maybe it depended on the people, the place, the luck. So here you are, either promised to someone you don't love or already shackled to them, watching the world pass by through a lattice window. You hear laughter from the stables or catch the scent of rosemary on someone's tunic, and your heart stirs in spite of everything. You think about what it might be like to choose freely. But in the Middle Ages, love is rarely free. It's priced in land, bloodlines, and obedience. And when it shows up uninvited, it often gets punished. You know who's always watching? The church, like always. Eyes in the choir loft, ears in the confession booth, hands in the parchment drawers. In the Middle Ages, falling in love wasn't just socially risky, it was spiritually dangerous. The church saw desire as a loaded crossbow pointed straight at the soul, and they made sure everyone, especially you, understood the consequences. Let's be clear. Medieval Christianity had a complex love-hate relationship with love. On the one hand, divine love was sacred. God's love, beautiful. The Virgin Mary's compassion, glorious. But romantic love, especially the messy, lusty kind that makes people do stupid things in gardens at midnight, that was a one-way ticket to hell, unless carefully contained inside marriage, properly blessed and thoroughly guilt-ridden. If you're lucky or unlucky enough to be educated in a monastic school, you're taught early on that the body is a vessel of temptation. The flesh, weak, the heart, deceitful. You're warned through parables, sermons, and stained glass windows that desire can ruin not just your life, but your afterlife. And yet, ironically, some of the most beautifully romantic writing of the time comes from monks and nuns wrestling with their own desires. Go figure. By the 12th century, the church is tightening its grip on marriage and love with iron tongs. Before that, marriage was more of a community thing. Families made deals, and the local lord might witness it, maybe with a priest on standby. But now, the church wants full control. No more backyard vows or secret pacts under the harvest moon. From 1215 on, with the Fourth Lateran Council, marriage becomes a sacrament. That means you need a priest and public witnesses. Secret marriages? Not just frowned upon, nullified. Your whispers in the chapel don't count unless the church says so. And don't think for a second that feelings matter. The church isn't interested in your butterflies. They care about legitimacy, of children, of land claims, of inheritances. Love is suspect unless it's disciplined by ritual and sealed with a sermon. Want to marry for love? Well, you'd better be ready to prove that your desire aligns with God's will. Otherwise, it's fornication. And fornication is sin. Sin needs confession or punishment. Now, let's talk about sex. Because you literally couldn't talk about love in the Middle Ages without opening the can of worms and then immediately being told to feel guilty about it. According to church doctrine, sex was only acceptable inside marriage. And even then, it had to be for procreation. Doing it for pleasure? That was a slippery slope toward damnation. Some theologians even went so far as to specify acceptable positions. Spoiler, if it sounded fun, it probably wasn't on the list. And yet, people kept doing it. Shocking, right? Despite fire and brimstone sermons, people fell in love, snuck into barns, and found ways to touch the untouchable. And when they got caught, oh boy, the punishments could be spiritual, social, or downright physical. A priest might sentence you to public penance, standing outside church in a shift, ash on your head, tears on your face. You might be barred from communion, excommunicated, or worse, dragged into an ecclesiastical trial and paraded as a cautionary tale. Take the case of Pierre Abelard and Heloise. He's a philosopher and teacher. She's his brilliant young student. They fall in love, and the result is a medieval scandal so intense it still gets analyzed in gender study classes today. Their secret affair leads to a secret child, a secret marriage, and finally a not-so-secret act of violent revenge. Abelard is castrated by Heloise's furious uncle and a few hired thugs. He retreats into monkhood. She becomes a nun. They spend the rest of their lives writing each other heartbreakingly articulate letters overflowing with longing, philosophy, and regret. If anyone ever doubted the danger of medieval love, that story pretty much seals it. Now, here's something weird. Despite all the church's rules, love still snuck in through the side door, in prayers, in mystical experiences, in the language of devotion. Some saints described their relationship with God using the same imagery found in romantic poetry. They blushed. They wept. They longed for union. Not in the carnal sense, of course, but still, the vocabulary got suspiciously steamy. The lines between spiritual ecstasy and romantic yearning weren't always as clear as the bishops would have liked. And then there's confession. Oh, confession. The medieval version of airing your dirty laundry to someone with total power over your eternal fate. If you confessed impure thoughts or deeds, you might be forgiven if you were truly repentant. But you'd also be marked, especially if you were a woman. Female sexuality was viewed as doubly dangerous, capable of tempting men and representing moral weakness. If a man fell into sin, it was often blamed on a woman who led him astray. So yes, love wasn't just dangerous, it was frequently weaponized against women. Some fringe beliefs pushed this even further. There were sects, eventually labeled heretical, that believed love itself could be a path to divine truth. The Cathars, for instance, rejected the material world entirely, including traditional marriage, and believed spiritual love transcended physical bonds. The church didn't like that one bit. Cathars were hunted down, excommunicated, and in many cases burned. Not metaphorically, actually burned. And of course, historians still debate whether the church's messaging really sank in. Did regular folks internalize all that fire and brimstone, or did they just nod along and then go home to their actual feelings? Some scholars argue that the average medieval villager lived a double life, outwardly devout, inwardly human. Others insist that fear of damnation genuinely shaped their emotional choices, keeping people from even considering certain relationships. Hard to know. Medieval diaries weren't exactly candid. So, here you are again, caught in a web spun from scripture and shame. Maybe you've just realized you're in love with a local Reeves daughter. You see her once a week at Mass, eyes lowered, hair veiled. You feel something stir that no sermon can quiet. But acting on it means risking not just your social standing, but your soul. Love isn't a blessing here. It's a battleground. And the church? It's the referee, the rule book, and the executioner all in one. You're adjusting the weight of a velvet headpiece that somehow feels like it was designed by someone who'd never worn one. The servants are murmuring in the hallway. The sun's casting long shadows through your stained glass window. And your heart is racing. Not because of your duties or your dress or the dozen eyes watching your every move, but because someone just left a lily on your windowsill. It wasn't your husband. If you're a noblewoman in the Middle Ages, falling in love is like dancing blindfolded on a frozen pond. It's thrilling, and sure, there's a chance you'll make it through unscathed. But odds are you're going to fall through the ice, and the water below is icy, bitter, and filled with consequences. Noble women walk a tightrope between being admired and being condemned. You're supposed to be beautiful, desirable, inspiring, but only in ways that don't lead to anything real. Courtly love rules say you could be adored from afar, written about in ballads, and honored in tournaments. But the moment admiration turns to action, that's when the entire house of cards collapses. And yet you want more. Not just admiration. Not just bows from suitors and polite smiles at banquets. You want to be known, touched, whispered to. And so, like many before you, you test the waters. Maybe you let the night linger a moment too long in your chambers. Maybe your eyes meet across the feasting table one too many times. It's small, harmless even. But this is the Middle Ages, where harmless is just danger dressed in pearls. Take the story of Queen Isabella of France. She was married to King Edward II, who, let's just say, wasn't exactly attentive in the way a medieval king was expected to be. Rumors flew about his preferences and favoritism toward his male companions. Isabella, after years of humiliation, found solace in a man named Roger Mortimer. Their affair wasn't just scandalous, it was political dynamite. Eventually, they led a rebellion against Edward, had him deposed, and possibly murdered. A love affair that literally toppled king. That's not poetry. That's history. For most noble women, their stories don't end with rebellion and regency. Instead, they conclude with banishment, forced confessions, and, if fortunate, confinement to a convent. If unlucky, they face public execution, burning, or stoning. Honor killings weren't exclusive to distant lands. They occurred in Europe's castles, cloaked as respectability and justice. What exacerbates this is the constant surveillance noble women endured. Ladies-in-waiting, guards, attendants, and even nuns watched their every move. Privacy was non-existent. Letters were intercepted, messengers bribed, and secrets leaked before they could be denied. When suspicion arose, a woman's body became evidence. Midwives and clerics were summoned to examine for signs of impropriety, an invasive practice that reached extreme levels. One bizarre historical fact. In the 14th century, Margaret of Hainaut, accused of infidelity, underwent a ritual where she walked barefoot and bareheaded to prove her innocence, believing God would strike her down if she lied. He didn't, but her reputation remained tarnished despite the lack of evidence. The stigma persisted even without proof, and pregnancy intensified the crisis. An undeniable sign. A child could threaten the noble line. If the lover was from a lower class, the baby was deemed illegitimate, unfit to inherit, yet dangerous enough to spark civil unrest. Some women were forced to take vows to conceal the pregnancy, while others were quietly executed before giving birth. This wasn't Gothic fiction. It was the harsh reality for women whose only crime was following their hearts. The issue wasn't just the punishment, but the double standard. Men could indulge in passion or recklessness and still be praised, their affairs seen as indulgences or signs of vitality. For women, one misstep branded them as harlots, temptresses, or disgraces. Love wasn't merely dangerous. It was a weapon turned against them with brutal efficiency. Yet, noble women found ways to love. Letters were hidden in sleeves, tokens sewn into hems, and secret codes woven into embroidery. Some were bold, making choices that risked their status and lives, escaping the hollow, gilded cages of their marriages. Though their stories rarely survive in chronicles, they whispered truths into tower walls, heartbroken lovers' poems, and lullabies for children who might never know their real fathers. Scholars debate the agency noble women truly possessed. Some argue they were powerless, at the mercy of husbands and families, while others suggest they were politically savvy, mastering manipulation, alliances, and quiet rebellion. Perhaps both are true, with survival requiring submission and strategy, depending on the moment. Imagine sitting in your solar, pretending to sew while your thoughts drift to a knight who smiled at you in the garden. You know the risks, you've seen the punishments, but you dream. Choosing who to love feels like your only true decision in a world where everything else is decided for you. You lean closer when he passes, accept a lily on your windowsill, and risk it all for a flicker of connection in a cold, calculated world. Love isn't safe here, but it's the only thing that feels real. At a harvest fair, music plays, lilting pipes, and drums that make feet tap despite objections. The fields were kind this season, with bread, cheese, and wine offering a moment of ease. Then you see him. A boy from the next village, shirt loose, hair too long, grinning carelessly. Your world shifts, but you're the daughter of a reeve, and he's a tanner's apprentice. In the Middle Ages, love across class lines isn't just awkward, it's dangerous. Rules dictated marriage within one station. Peasants with peasants, merchants with merchants, nobles with nobles. These boundaries were as fixed as hedges, sharp if crossed. The era was obsessed with order, divine, social, and legal, where everyone had their place like stones in a wall. A shift for love threatened the entire structure. Though spoken for, married to a miller's son next spring with decent hands and a cow, your heart belongs to the tanner's boy, who makes you laugh and talks of stars and herons' nests. If your father discovers your time with someone below your rank, he'll react, not out of cruelty, but because your marriage involves dowries, alliances, and family reputation. On the other side, as a squire with dirt under your nails and stars in your eyes, you notice the baron's daughter in the stable. She smells of jasmine and parchment, smiling as if trying not to. You believe the ballads that love can rise above your station, but your feelings are threatening, not charming. Discovery could cost you teeth, a tongue, or your life, disappearing into the woods. One historical case. Agnes Hodo, a 14th century English noblewoman, disguised herself as a man to fight a duel in her father's place, possibly for love, showing how tangled love, class, and reputation became. A wrong move could tarnish a family's name for generations. In some towns, a lower-class man pursuing a noblewoman was forced to parade with donkey ears and a collar, pelted with objects, a humiliation to crush hope. Cross-class romance involved property, legacy, and bloodlines, making love treasonous, especially with child. Illegitimate children posed political problems, disputes over inheritance, land rights, even fealty to the crown, yet occurred more than records suggest. Runaway marriages and secret ceremonies in moonlit chapels led to lives as outlaws, with low survival rates due to sheriffs and wolves. Historians debate the rigidity of class rules, suggesting flexibility during upheavals like the Black Death, when labor shortages gave peasants leverage, though divisions likely remained entrenched. You sit with your feelings, head down, pretending not to look toward the tannery path. But at night, by a low fire, you dream of what might have been, that ember of love warming you despite the world's judgment. Under an olive tree, late summer dust and rosemary scent the air. A troubadour's soft melody drifts over the vineyard wall, half singing, half mourning, not from a courtier or priest, but a recklessly romantic figure. In 12th century southern France, the birthplace of courtly love, troubadours and troubadours sang of longing and despair, social grenades and courts bound by rules. As a noblewoman in a chilly stone hall, your husband hunts, and you endure dull meals and tax talks until the troubadour steps forward, singing of you, not by name, but through metaphor and melody, shifting the hall's air. Some pretend not to notice, others smirk, and your cheeks burn as your heart races. It's a declaration, a risk, for songs aren't safe, especially love songs. Troubadours were artists and agitators, their words elevating or destroying. One example, Guillaume de Cabestan, killed for loving his lord's wife, with his heart allegedly cooked and served to her, leading to her suicide. Songs could be fictional, crafted for fame or gossip, but perception mattered. Virtue could be ruined by a clever chorus. There was a belief that such songs inspired ennobling love, where a woman's adoration from afar made a man braver or wiser, reducing her to a symbol, not a partner. Responding with affection made her inappropriate. Performers relied on patronage, risking exile or death for an offended lord. Some scholars suggest love songs had secret messages for affairs or rebellions, their weight evident in a controlled society. Historians debate their impact. Were they soap operas or emotional shapers? Letters, poems, and secret meetings suggest real passion endured. You sit, heart pounding, feigning indifference as the troubadour sings, his words dancing like fingertips on your spine, offering a moment's escape from cold stones and marriages. Kneeling by a fire, you roll parchment, heart thudding, having spent nights drafting a love letter hidden under a floor tile. Each sentence feels like a tightrope walk with a torch. In a world where public declarations risked scandal, letters were lifelines, soft poetry or careful prose that could become evidence. Sealed with wax and your family's crest, you entrust it to a servant, believing the risk is worth it for the one waiting in a cold chamber or locked chapel. But half the castle's suspects, stewards notice nervous servants, ladies in waiting your distraction. If intercepted, the letter becomes a confession. In the late 13th century, the Countess of Salisbury's rumored letters with a knight stalled his career, proof unnecessary in a gossip-driven court. Letters lacked privacy, read aloud, or kept as ammunition, handwriting tracing even anonymous notes. Still, people wrote, using ciphers, classical references, or foreign languages, sometimes masking desire as piety. In 14th century Florence, nun sister Benedetti's intimate letters with another woman led to a trial in silence, her words preserved as evidence. Historians debate their prevalence, accepted flirtation or burned to avoid discovery. Staring at the hearth, you wait, imagining your lover's smile or interrogation, the letter a chain or flame to memorize and burn. Ducking under a tapestry-lined corridor, your heart pounds after laughing with someone other than your husband or kin. Whispers start, danger curling like smoke, for jealousy brought swords, slander, or arsenic. As a knight back from campaign, your lord's lingering gaze on his wife and your wine offering shift the room. He questions, watches, for honor and masculinity hinge on control, suspicion enough for crisis. A man's rumored infidelity caused political embarrassment or lost allies, leading to judicial duels, like a 13th century Aquitaine nobleman killing his wife's suspected lover, confining her to a convent. Women, with fewer options, spread rumors or appealed to the church, accusing seduction or witchcraft. Husbands could physically discipline or lock away wives. A superstition claimed feeding powdered bones of a faithful spouse warded off infidelity. Children intensified jealousy, resemblance sparking questions of legitimacy, affecting succession and wealth. Priests recorded confessions swayed by influence. Love triangles ended in heartbreak or exile, glorified as honor or fault depending on the victor. You sit, fearing that laugh sealed your fate, recalling dragged women and silenced nights, learning jealousy's long memory. On a gray morning, rain taps the windowsill as monastery bells ring for prayer, but for some, it marks another day hiding forbidden love. In rough wool, sleeping on straw, monks and nuns felt longing despite vows. A young monk notices Brother Thomas's honeyed Latin and lingering touch, sparking danger in a life of surveillance. Meals in silence, shared quarters. Nuns, often sent unwillingly, found warmth in smiles or garden brushes, facing separation or excommunication if discovered. A 14th century abbess lost her title over a novice, both reassigned or vanished. The church sometimes covered up affairs pragmatically, whisking away babies or arranging escapes. Locks inside cells contained temptation, yet letters and glances persisted. Scholars debate their frequency, but small moments, shared candles, whispered confessions, became monumental. You sit, heart pounding, wondering if a laugh or letter will end you, for love and jealousy shaped a world where even whispers carried the weight of life or death. Your name, or someone you know, is scrawled in rough Latin on a smudging parchment, pinned up in the drizzle alongside a list of charges: adultery, seduction, violation of moral law. In the Middle Ages, love didn't just break hearts, it broke laws. No courtroom drama is needed to feel the weight as people shift awkwardly, whispering and eyeing the accused. Perhaps a young woman seen too close to a merchant's son, or a scribe who sent too many letters to the baker's wife. Medieval towns offered no privacy and eagerly made examples of those who loved without permission. The punishments were strange and inconsistent. Loving the wrong person might earn a fine, while sneaking into someone's home after dark could lead to public flogging or a parade in a donkey's harness. In some places, shame masks, metal contraptions shaped like grotesque faces, were strapped onto offenders, turning them into walking warnings. It wasn't just physical acts that were policed. The church influenced laws to target intentions. Writing a love poem, exchanging glances, or hinting at affection outside marriage could land you before a magistrate or, in serious cases, an ecclesiastical court. Church trials for love were far from charming. Take Etienne de Bourbon, a 13th century inquisitor who tried a young woman accused of bewitching a married man with her songs. After testimony and lyric readings, she was forced to wear sackcloth, walk barefoot through her village, and endure 40 days of penance, all because of her voice. In medieval Germany and France, night singing was banned. Serenading under a window after dark could mean a fine or jail, as passions were deemed untrustworthy after sunset. These laws weren't applied equally. Noblemen with connections could charm or pay their way out, while peasants and women faced harsh consequences: public humiliation, forced marriage, or exile. Pregnancy intensified scrutiny. Courts might demand the father's name, and refusal could bring whipping and disgrace. Accusations, often baseless, were weaponized. A rejected suitor or rival could ruin someone with convenient witnesses. Scholars debate enforcement, some seeing these laws as symbolic tools for social control, others as common responses to love's perceived danger to medieval order. Watching the rain blur ink and lives on the village post, you feel the stakes. You recall a couple who fled last spring, the girl returning alone and silent, escorted by guarded eyes, holding a note from someone who smiled too warmly. You haven't burned it, believing love might still be worth it despite unjust laws and undeserved punishments. Standing in the town center, every face turns to you in thick silence, broken only by a cart's clatter or a child's cough. A rope loosely binds your wrist, not for hanging, but for watching, judging, shaming. Your crime, love of the wrong kind at the wrong time. This is medieval public punishment, theater, not justice. Your mistake isn't handled privately. You're an object lesson, displayed to deter others from crossing invisible borders of acceptable desire. The crowd isn't shocked. Men caught in illicit beds crawled through town in ash tunics. Women accused of adultery were shaved and paraded barefoot. Lovers tied back to back and dumped. Your penance is mild. 3 days fasting outside the church in a coarse linen shift and rope, enduring spit, thrown objects, and laughter. You must confess publicly, loudly, whether you mean it or not. Shame is the tool here, wielded by church, council, and neighbors alike. You think of a widow punished for remarrying too soon, a servant girl flogged for a lord's son's boredom, a priest vanished over a letter to my dearest. Punishments escalated, branding with irons on face, chest, or hand marked offenders permanently. In 14th century England, laws against incontinence enforced fines for inappropriate touch, lashings for repeats, and forced marriages for pregnancies without rings. A life sentence masked as redemption. Couples caught in forbidden love wore chains or nettle crowns, jeered by crowds, while a German village used a seesaw over manure to extract confessions. Yet, you're not broken. The touch, the kiss, the letter, they were truth, not sin. As you stand with stinging eyes, you recall their hand in yours, a warmth worth the shame. Scholars question if these punishments changed behavior or drove secrecy, but fear lingered, shaping compliance. With rope around your waist and shift clinging in the drizzle, you remain defiant, knowing love's reality can't be unmade. The sky turns sickly yellow-gray, streets reeking of ash and worse, as you step over a bundle, laundry, or a body. In 1349, love isn't just risky, it's suicidal with a black death. Touching a hand or kissing a cheek is a life-or-death gamble. Priests can't bury fast enough. Children bury parents, parents bury children, gravediggers vanish. Society's structure cracks. Hierarchy and class barriers weaken. As a baker's daughter, you've never spoken to the apothecary's apprentice. But as plague carts roll and bells toll, he brings herbs, touching your hand unloved. You don't stop him. Loss makes love a lifeline. Across Europe, survivors cling desperately, marrying in haste, forming raw bonds under death's shadow. The church, overwhelmed, blames romantic sins for the plague, preaching moral decay as divine wrath. A Florence couple married secretly across classes, only to be separated and die apart, their tragedy whispered for years. Others lean into desire. Monks flee with widows. Women love gravediggers. Young men offer flowers through windows. A German rumor claims kissing a stranger under a certain moon wards off plague, leading to desperate public embraces. Historians debate if the plague loosened norms or tightened morality, but records show secret unions and hasty letters. Pulling your hood tight, you see a man and woman too close in the chapel, clutching like lifelines, reading a singed letter. If we must die, let it be with our hands entwined. You cry at its bravery. Whispering yes to walk beside someone, love becomes a protest against despair, worth dying for. Mud halfway up your legs, cloak torn, you grip a damp love letter amid battlefield chaos, shouting, clashing steel. It's your lifeline, reminding you of a world beyond blood. Soldiers wrote such letters in crude Latin, hiding them in armor, reread under stars. Your beloved's messy note with a crushed forget-me-not and rosemary scent speaks of harvest and dreams of your return. hitting harder than poetry. These romances fueled fights, promising home, but letters could be intercepted, mocked, or used as leverage. During the Hundred Years' War, soldiers carried tokens, lockets, hair, and helmets, scavenged from the dead. Women followed camps, disguised or waiting, risking all for stolen kisses. Thomas Golder was dismissed for abandoning his post over a lost love, a sad subplot. Some escaped marriage through war, forming brief affairs, debated as romance or convenience. Tucking the letter away, you rise at dawn, fighting not just for glory, but to hold your beloved again. Love haunted men as much as war screams, giving reason to move forward. Hearing clanging and fire, you press against a wall. Villages burned not from famine or plague, but love. A kiss or glance between rival houses sparked bloodshed. In 14th century Verona, Montague and Capulet feuds stemmed from scandalous relationships, threatening noble bloodlines. Eleanor of Aquitaine's marriage to Henry II unified territories but bred wars and rebellion. Peter Abelard and Heloise's story, scaled nationally, shows love's chaos. Love started wars, blending personal and political, a recurring medieval disaster. With a rare deviations or quiet norms kept out of sight. Some claim the monasteries were stricter than a prison. Others suggest that emotional intimacy was so deeply human it became inevitable, and that the church simply turned a blind eye unless forced to act. It's hard to know. So many of the stories were erased. But what survives in letters, testimonies, and a few scandalized papal bulls paint a picture that's far more tangled than the official narrative. So here you are, caught in a life of silence, but feeling more than you know how to name. You try to pray it away, to bury it in parchment and psalms. But when the person next to you kneels just a little closer, when your fingers brush at the communion rail, it comes roaring back, the ache, the longing, the risk. Love wasn't supposed to follow you into sacred spaces, but it did. And once it found you, no amount of incense or chanting could drive it out. It's your wedding day. There's music, kind of a procession of grim-looking family members, definitely. You're wearing something that took 6 hours to tie correctly, and you can barely breathe beneath the layers. Your groom stands next to you like a stone statue in boots, silent, stiff, and trying not to trip on his own ceremonial sword. You don't love him. You've never loved him, and he doesn't love you either. But here you are, joined by God and law with no hope of annulment and no escape clause. Welcome to the medieval reality of arranged marriage misery. You're not surprised. Everyone told you this would happen. You've known since you were a child, when your name was first scribbled beside someone else's on the corner of a legal document you weren't allowed to read. The marriage is a business deal, not a romance. Your dowry, 3 acres of land, 6 goats, and a wine press, isn't a token of affection. It's leverage. You get your land. Your family gets protection. Love doesn't even factor into it. And yet you hope just a little. Maybe he'd be kind. Maybe he'd laugh at your jokes or ask what you dreamed about at night. But now that you stand beside him, both of you trapped in solemn silence, you realize that kindness isn't on the table either. You're not marrying a man. You're marrying an obligation, and the chains are already tightening. It's not just nobles. Even among peasants and merchants, arranged marriages were the norm. Romantic love might spark before or during a marriage, sure, but it was a bonus, not the foundation. If your heart was set on someone else, too bad. Parents, priests, and village elders made the decisions. You were expected to fall in line and then fall in bed. And if you didn't, well, things got unpleasant. Take the story of Margery Kemp, a middle-class woman from England in the 15th century who, after giving birth to 14 children, decided she didn't want to have sex with her husband anymore. She claimed divine inspiration and asked for a chaste marriage. He didn't agree at first. They fought. She cried. Eventually, he conceded, but not without years of spiritual guilt-tripping and social shaming. Their love, or what passed for it, was never romantic. It was rooted in obligation, economic alliance, and shared suffering. That was the reality for most people. Some medieval law codes actually allowed spouses to be dragged to court for refusing their marital duties. If a wife denied her husband conjugal rights, she could be accused of rebellion. If a husband refused his wife, he could be labeled impotent. And believe it or not, impotence trials were a real thing, with public testimony and sometimes horrifyingly physical inspections. Nothing says romance like a court-ordered examination. And here's the nightmare scenario. You're married, but you fall in love with someone else, someone who listens, someone who sees you. But your marriage is binding, irrevocable. The only acceptable reason for separation is non-consummation, and that window's long closed. So what do? Some run. A few succeed. Most are caught, punished, and thrown back into the arms of a spouse they cannot stand. Or worse, you act on your feelings and get caught. Adultery isn't just shameful, it's criminal. For women especially, the penalties were harsh. Public flogging, facial branding, or forced penance. For men, punishment varied. Sometimes exile, sometimes forced service in the army, sometimes nothing at all because men, as usual, had more wiggle room. But even they weren't invincible. A husband who cuckolded a nobleman could face a duel or death. Love triangles didn't end with witty banter. They ended in funerals. Let's pause for a weird historical detail. In some parts of medieval Europe, there were marriage manuals written by clergymen to help couples navigate their duties. They included such timeless advice as always ask permission before trying unusual positions and do not perform the act on feast days. Imagine reading that as a terrified 16-year-old on the eve of your wedding, married to a complete stranger who smells like wet fur. Romantic, right? Scholars still argue about how miserable these arranged marriages really were. Some say couples grew to care for one another in time. That duty and shared survival forged real bonds. Others point out the high rates of domestic violence, the records of women begging for release, and the countless tragic poems written by men and women who were quite literally trapped. There's probably truth in both views. But when love wasn't part of the equation to start with, happiness always had to work harder to show up. And what about annulments? Technically, they existed, but they were rare, expensive, and deeply political. You needed a powerful ally, a sympathetic bishop, or a truly convincing story, like hidden incest, deception, or demonic possession. Yes, that last one was an actual excuse. For most people, till death do us part wasn't poetic, it was terrifyingly literal. You glance over at your husband now. He still hasn't spoken much. Later, you'll lie beside him in a cold bed, staring up at the rafters while he snores and the candle gutter's low. You'll wonder what might have been if you'd been allowed to choose, if you could have followed your heart instead of your family's ledger. But in the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't the beginning of a love story. It was the end of possibility. And yet, even in that bleakness, people still dreamed, still wrote poems, still watched from across the market square, and let their hearts flutter at the wrong moment. Because hope, as always, is the most reckless and persistent thing of all. You're bent over a wooden table lit by a single flickering candle, grinding herbs with a pestle in slow, practiced circles. The smell is sweet, honeysuckle, a hint of rose, and something darker underneath. You're careful with the measurements, whispering words you were never taught in church, your fingers moving like they've done this before. Because tonight, someone's coming to you for a love potion. And while most folks look to the clergy for salvation, they come to you when it's matters of the heart. And in the Middle Ages, that's more dangerous than any battlefield. It's no secret that when love went unrequited, or worse, when it was never supposed to happen in the first place, people got desperate. And desperation turned them toward folk remedies, old charms, and whispered spells passed down by grandmothers who kept secrets in locked boxes and beneath their skirts. You're one of those women now, or maybe just someone on the edge of society with the knowledge no one admits they need. Either way, your trade is quiet, careful, and deadly if discovered. You know the risks. Using love magic was considered heresy at best, witchcraft at worst. Both were punishable by fines, imprisonment, or execution. But people still came, slipping through the hedgerow after dark, leaving coins in your window box, asking for just a little something to make someone look their way. Because the church might preach patience and chastity, But when you're heartbroken, those sermons don't do much, not like a satchel of dried roots soaked in wine and murmured over 3 times under a full moon. Love magic came in many forms. Potions were the most common, mixtures of herbs, flowers, and sometimes questionable ingredients. Some are basically medieval aphrodisiacs: mint, basil, honey, pepper. Others included things that would make your stomach turn: animal parts, blood, even grave dirt. People believed these concoctions could open hearts, spark desire, or bind lovers together forever. The idea of consent? Not exactly a medieval priority in these matters. And then there were charms, words written backward, symbols etched onto wax, bits of hair tied with red thread and buried under doorsteps. If you were bold, you might sneak a charm into your beloved's food or wine. If you were subtle, you'd wear one on a ribbon beneath your clothing, whispering their name under your breath at dawn. It wasn't love, but it was power, and that for many was enough. Of course, the church condemned all of it. Love spells were said to invite demons, to corrupt the soul, to mock the divine order of marriage and duty. But the clergy weren't always consistent in their own behavior. More on that later. What mattered is that you weren't allowed to use these tools, especially if you were a woman. A woman with power, after all, was dangerous. A woman who knew how to manipulate desire? Practically a walking execution warrant. Historical fact for your nightmares. In 1324, a woman named Alice Keitler was accused of using love magic to manipulate her husbands. Yes, plural. She'd married several wealthy men, all of whom mysteriously died and left her their fortunes. Naturally, suspicion fell on her. Among the charges? Her use of sorceries, incantations, and magical powders to ensnare men's affections. She fled before she could be burned, but her maid wasn't so lucky. She was whipped, tortured, and eventually executed. One woman's love life became another woman's death sentence. And the paranoia didn't stop there. In many villages, if someone became suddenly affectionate or abandoned their proper suitor, people started whispering about potions. If you were too beautiful, suspicious. If you were too persuasive, definitely unnatural. Women who dared to express romantic agency, whether by magic, charm, or just sheer personality, were seen as disruptive forces, dangerous, the kind who could unravel marriages and cause men to forget their duties, which in medieval terms made them enemies of the social order. But not all love magic was so sinister. Some was sweet, hopeful. A girl might tuck a daisy under her pillow to dream of her future husband. A boy might carve the initials of his crush into an apple, then toss it into a stream to see how far it floated, a measure of how deep her feelings ran. There were songs sung at twilight, barefoot dances in the fields, and little rites performed with candlelight and hope. Harmless rituals, really, but still considered suspect by those who enforce the rules. Modern scholars argue about whether these love spells actually worked, but that's beside the point. They mattered. They gave people agency, however small, in a world where their choices were so often made for them. For women in particular, love magic offered the illusion of control over their marriages, their lovers, their futures. Whether the spell worked or not, the act of performing it gave shape to their longing. It made the impossible feel a little closer. And there's the scholarly debate. Was love magic subversion or survival? Some historians view it as a form of rebellion, women using the only tools available to them to reclaim power. Others argue it was just another symptom of powerlessness, a reflection of how desperate people were to control something, anything. Maybe it was both. Maybe every love spell was both a cry for help and a refusal to be helpless. So now here you are, holding a vial of thick, sweet liquid, still warm from your hands. The person who asked for it will come tonight, nervous and hopeful. Maybe it's a young girl desperate to turn her friend's attention from another. Maybe it's an older woman trying to keep a drifting husband close. You won't ask questions. You never do. But part of you wonders how much of what they feel is real and how much is just the spell. The rain's letting up now, the candle's burning low. You clean your tools and tuck the ingredients away in the hollow beneath the hearthstone. You'll never write any of this down. You'll never speak of it aloud. But the truth lingers in the air, heavy and scented and silent. Love in the Middle Ages didn't come with safety. Sometimes it came in a cup, and sometimes that cup could kill. The great hall smells of roasted boar, wax, and too many egos. Your goblet is full, but your appetite isn't. The table is packed with nobles laughing too loud, boasting about hunts, boarders, and bastard sons. Your seat is gilded. Your robes are fine. And across the room, making every muscle in your body tighten, is someone you should absolutely not be thinking about. Because you're not just any noble tonight, you're royalty. And that person you keep glancing at, that's the kind of love affair that topples crowns. You think being royal would make falling in love easier, all that power, all that privacy. And yet, it's the exact opposite. Every glance you steal, every gesture you make, has implications. Kingdoms hinge on your fidelity. If you're a queen, your virtue is national policy. If you're a king, your mistress might be the tipping point in a war. There are no harmless crushes at this level, just careful calculations and explosive consequences. Take King Edward IV of England. Dashing, popular, and prone to falling in love like it was his full-time job. When he married Elizabeth Woodville in secret, bypassing all the carefully arranged diplomatic matches planned for him, it sent shockwaves through the court. She wasn't of royal blood. She was a widow, the daughter of a knight. Scandalous, yes, but also deeply destabilizing. Suddenly, the queen's family rose in influence, causing bitter resentment among the nobles who'd expected to hold power. Love didn't just disrupt Edward's personal life. It triggered a political powder keg that helped ignite the War of the Roses. And then there's Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II. Now that's a royal love story worthy of a Greek tragedy. She was smart, ambitious, and beautiful. He was driven, volatile, and equally brilliant. They married for power, but it wasn't long before passion turned to fury. Eleanor eventually supported her sons in a rebellion against their father, her own husband. The result? Henry imprisoned her for 16 years. Let that sink in. A queen locked away because her love curdled into resistance. Royal women had it especially rough. While kings could enjoy mistresses with little more than a wagging finger from the clergy, queens had no such luxury. If a queen was suspected of infidelity, it wasn't just gossip, it was treason. A single rumor could call the legitimacy of the heir into question. And in a world obsessed with pure bloodlines, that kind of uncertainty was enough to get heads chopped off, literally. And Bullen ring a bell? She wasn't born royal, but she became queen by convincing King Henry VIII to split the entire church in half. Bold move. Their love was fiery, manipulative, obsessive, and short-lived. After failing to give him a male heir, she was accused of adultery, incest, and witchcraft. Whether any of it was true still sparks debate, but that didn't save her. She was beheaded in 1536, and Henry moved on to the next woman like he was flipping pages in a grim romance novel. Fringe fact, some royal courts employed bedchamber spies. Yes, actual people assigned to monitor and report on a monarch's nighttime activities. Their job? Keep tabs on who entered whose room, who left at what hour, and how many candles were lit while they were in there. Privacy was a foreign concept in court life, especially when a single whispered secret could shift the balance of power. And yet, despite the risk, despite the ever-watchful eyes and the very real chance of execution, royal love affairs flourished. Letters were smuggled in the folds of gowns. Rendezvous were arranged under cloaks of prayer and diplomacy. Tapestries covered more than just stone walls. They hid stolen moments. These weren't just lusty flings. They were passionate, rebellious, and sometimes heartbreakingly sincere. Now, historians love to debate how romantic royal love affairs really were. Were they genuine emotional connections, or were they just power plays wearing perfume? Some scholars say it's all theater, kings and queens using each other like pawns. Others argue that love did sometimes burn hot beneath the layers of strategy and protocol. The truth? Probably a messy mix of both. Like everything in the Middle Ages, the lines between politics and passion were blurry at best. And the damage these affairs left behind? Oh, it was real. Children born out of wedlock, called royal bastards, couldn't inherit thrones, but that didn't stop them from trying. Alliances built on marriages collapsed when love got in the way. Wars were fought not just for land or faith, but for personal revenge wrapped in political justification. When royalty loved recklessly, it wasn't just their hearts on the line. It was entire kingdoms. But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. For some, love was the only thing in their lives they didn't have to share with their advisors, their guards, their subjects. It was a secret flame in a freezing room, something personal in a world where even your children were national assets. So, yes, it was dangerous. Yes, it was foolish, but it was also theirs. You look across the Great Hall again. Your fingers tighten around your goblet. You should look away, but you don't. You're royal. You're watched. But for just a moment, your eyes meet, and everything else, the politics, the marriage, the war plans, melts away. There's only this moment, this glance, this quiet, treasonous feeling. Because when you wear a crown, you don't get to love freely. But that doesn't mean you stop loving. Your cloak is too thin for this wind, and your boots are caked in mud. You shouldn't be here, on this path, at this hour under this sky. But you are, because love doesn't care about curfews or curates. It only cares that they said yes. And now you're running away from your life, your name, your family. You're eloping in the Middle Ages, which, to be clear, is only slightly less dangerous than charging in a battle with a wooden spoon. There's no wedding feast, no priest in ceremonial robes, just the chapel up ahead, closed and dark, but with a sympathetic friar waiting inside. You've paid him well, or blackmailed him. Either way, he's agreed to say the words that will bind you together. You're shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the high of finally choosing something for yourself, a husband you want, not one your father picked after inspecting livestock. But let's not get carried away. This isn't a romantic comedy. This is the Middle Ages, where running off to marry someone without approval from your family or your feudal lord could be considered a crime. If you're a noblewoman, it might be classified as treason. If your lover is of lower status, it's even worse. Because this isn't just about feelings, it's about land, bloodlines, and inheritance. You've stolen yourself, and the people who feel entitled to you will want you back. And what happens if they catch you? Well, that depends. If you're lucky, you'll be dragged home, locked in your chamber, and made to fast for 40 days while a bishop unravels the validity of your illegitimate union. If you're unlucky, your husband will be flogged, possibly hanged, and you'll be forced to marry someone else anyway, with no further say in the matter. And that's the light version. One historical account from 13th century Normandy tells of a knight who married a young noblewoman in secret after her father denied his proposal. When the father found out, he rallied his men, burned the knight's manor to the ground, and hunted the couple through the forest for weeks. The knight was eventually caught and executed, his body displayed in the town square. The bride? She was confined to a convent for the rest of her life. Romantic, right? And even if your escape plan works, if you get married, slip away to another town, and blend in, your troubles aren't over. Medieval law had a charming loophole where any marriage not conducted with proper banns, public announcements read at church 3 weeks in a row, could be declared null and void. That means your father, or worse, your husband's enemies, could argue that the whole thing was illegitimate. Cue the church stepping in to investigate your vows like a nosy ant with judicial authority. Fringe fact for you. In some areas, if a woman eloped, her family could legally demand compensation from the groom. Not for her feelings, mind you, but for the loss of economic value. That's right. You, as a runaway bride, were financially appraised like a piece of land. Your scandal wasn't just personal, it was a property dispute. And yet, people still did it. They ran off, clutching each other's hands, hearts pounding. Because for some, even the smallest taste of freedom was worth the price. You might not have a dowry or permission or a long and peaceful life ahead. But for one night, you have choice. And in this world, that's more intoxicating than wine. It wasn't just nobles or peasants. Even in the growing urban centers, where merchant families jockeyed for social status, love still caused people to abandon carefully arranged futures. A shopgirl falling for a tanner's apprentice. A weaver's son fleeing with the daughter of a spice merchant. Not exactly the stuff of troubadour ballads, but just as risky because the rules didn't care about your income level, just your obedience. And sometimes the church wasn't your enemy. There were rogue priests, minor clerics, even entire parishes that turned a blind eye to love marriages. Maybe they believed in romance. Maybe they just needed the coin. Either way, they gave desperate lovers a sliver of hope. Secret vows were whispered in Latin. Rings were exchanged beneath candlelight. Promises made that no one could erase, even if the church later tried. Scholars still argue about how common elopements really were. Some suggest that love marriages were more frequent than we assume, especially in less strictly regulated communities. Others insist these stories were outliers, kept alive by the sheer drama of their outcomes. But one thing's certain. For every couple who ran away, there were many more who wanted to, who dreamed of it, who planned right down to the hour and then didn't go through with it. Because fear won. But not tonight. You went through with it. You said the words. You kissed beneath a half-collapsed roof while rain dripped through the rafters. You believed that love could be a shield, that it could carry you through. And maybe, just maybe, it will. Though, as you pull your hood tighter and look behind you on the winding road, you already hear the distant hooves. Someone knows. Someone's coming. Because in the Middle Ages, love might make you run, but it never let you hide for long. You're standing in the town square, mud on your shoes, your hands trembling under your cloak. A crowd is forming, not because there's a juggler or a saint's relic on display, but because the bailiff has just nailed a parchment to the post. Imagine two high-ranking nobles, one from France, one from Flanders, falling deeply in love despite their family's generations-long territorial rivalry. Their secret marriage sparks a scandal that escalates into treason accusations, mobilizing armies and pillaging towns caught between the houses, all over a private union turned public warfare. A fringe fact. In the 15th century, a minor German duchy endured a 2-year feud with skirmishes, embargoes, and hostage-taking after the duke's sister eloped with a court musician. The musician was executed, the sister placed under house arrest, and the ducal treasury never recovered from the romantic rebellion's cost. That's the danger of love in the medieval world. It rarely stayed small. Even a whisper of a forbidden liaison could be deemed a war declaration. Loving an enemy threatened borders, seen as fault lines, with love's explosive energy stomping recklessly. It wasn't just nobles. Merchant families could collapse if a child married against family interests. In Venice, rival guild families fought street wars over romantic betrayal, with intercepted love letters read aloud, marriages annulled, and shipping routes disrupted by teenage passion. The most devastating example is Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Her influence rewrote England's religious and political landscape, breaking from the Catholic Church, creating the Church of England, and executing resistors, with thousands dying. Scholars debate whether love caused these wars or served as an excuse for political greed, though passion in the wrong place could make kings reckless and generals foolish, leaving fire, loss, and regret. Peering around a corner, you watch smoke rise above a burning chapel, flames accusing the heavens. You saw the lovers flee on horseback, leaving the town in ashes, perhaps believing they'd outrun the cost, or not caring. Part of you understands, recalling the urge to forget duty for love. Love has never been reasonable or safe. In the Middle Ages, it set the world ablaze. Fleeing down a back alley, lungs tight, you wonder how many more cities will burn before feelings are restrained. Likely none. In a candlelit cathedral, stone walls echoing, you keep your hood up, a habit born of necessity. The safest love here is silent. Hidden glances, lingering touches veiled by incense. Loving someone of the same gender wasn't just taboo. It was illegal, heretical, punishable by death or exile. Yet, love persisted quietly, fiercely, in abbey shadows, private gardens, and coded letters. You mask your feelings with practiced smiles at feasts, steadying your voice against jokes about unnatural affections, while a lover's name echoes in your mind like a prayer. Homosexual acts were condemned by 12th century church law, like the Decretum Gratiani, labeling them crimes against nature. Sodomy, a broad term, led to excommunication, torture, or worse, especially in noble or religious courts where scandal amplified punishment. Richard Puller, a 14th century nobleman, lost titles and lands over rumors of same-sex relationships. His name erased, and lovers forced to denounce him. Women loving women faced double erasure, romantic transgression, and societal voicelessness, often masked as deep friendship, though poems and carved symbols reveal the truth. A fringe fact: in 14th century France, two peasant women lived as a married couple, one adopting a male identity, until exposed. Confused, the court dropped the case, and they vanished into history. Scholars debate their frequency, suggesting coded prevalence or caution against modern labels, but letters pulse with affection crossing gender lines. Monasteries, with their closeness, harbored emotional and physical bonds, documented by scandalized abbots or inquisitions. Lighting a candle, you recall your lover's hand brushing yours at vespers, their laugh slipping out, a fading letter in your cloak. Fear sometimes silences you, nodding at marriage talk, enduring ceremonies, but hope lingers. You're not alone. Others whispered forbidden names, carved initials in pews, risking all for real love, deemed impossible yet enduring. In a damp cathedral, robes stiff, you tremble beneath your sleeves, heart pounding from a corridor smile. Clerical vows, poverty, obedience, chastity bind you, yet love defies them. Celibacy, enforced since the 12th century, replaced earlier tolerance of priest families. Still, feelings emerge, her lingering confession, his psalm-singing hum, a shared silence. Records show constant breaches. 14th century English courts handled priestly incontinence cases, some consensual, some coercive, with same-sex monastic love confessed in letters like, "Your absence wounds me." A fringe fact: a late 13th century Flemish priest kept a secret apartment for a weaver's daughter, claiming spiritual guidance. Exposed, he was defrocked, fined, and exiled. She was confined. Nuns, often forced into convents, found connection, loving each other, clerics or saints, yearning in surviving diaries. Caught clerics faced defrocking or execution, nuns solitary confinement or penance, many vanishing from records. Scholars debate if these were lapses or rebellion, with enforcement varying by politics. Beside you, a familiar gate approaches. Warmth defies vows, unspoken but felt. You imagine their hand in yours, a heartbeat's freedom, for even holy hearts weren't safe from love beneath the crucifix. Shoes drag on uneven flagstones, cold biting your spine as women in the hall. Priest's wife, chambermaid, the ever-watchful napper, glance and pretend not. Your shawl tightens against their judgment, sensing guilt before proof. In the Middle Ages, a woman's desire damned her. A thought, a sigh for someone other than your husband, sufficed. Labeled harlot, temptress, witch. Desire was unstable, demonic, with Eve as the cautionary tale. Tempting man, ruining paradise. Wanting was bad, being wanted threatened households. Women shrank feelings, hiding smiles and dreams, but discovery turned them other. Accused of enchantment, a 1320 woman, Elena of Bruges, was burned for a dream kiss, tortured into confession, her accuser silenced. Physicians blamed desire on womb heat or hysteria, prescribing leeching or forced intercourse. Some resisted, love letters in disguise, market tokens, church touches, paying with blood or silence. Ballads echo their voices, a girl drowning, a widow fleeing, a noble poetess. Scholars debate women's romantic agency, some seeing flexibility in daily life, others absolute restriction, with resistance costing dearly. In your room, clutching a linen scrap with his initials, green your favorite color, You feel fiercely, knowing desire isn't evil, just dangerous. At a forest edge, a pouch of herbs, bone dust, and a charm weighs your sleeve. You've trekked 2 villages for love magic. Charms under mattresses, potions of rosemary and wine, whispers over flames. Across Europe, it thrived when prayers failed or marriages chilled, offering control. Hopeful spells attracted love. Vengeful ones bound or pained strayers, risking death if caught. A 14th-century Paris midwife, Johanna, made potions with coral and blood, exiled after torture, her clients spared. A Norwegian girl's runes kept her lover ashore, marrying her. The church condemned it as heresy, questioning confessors on magical acts. Scholars debate if it was psychology or belief, but rituals persisted. Kneeling, you bury the charm, whispering his name, hoping love hears, a rebellion against caged hearts. A whisper, a fond name, a long glance, triggers calculations. Who saw? Who'll speak? Reputation, a living currency, drains with forbidden love's words. A neighbor's formality, a brother-in-law's avoidance, signal gossips spread, needing no facts, just repetition. Women's purity, tied to virginity and obedience, made their slope slick, generosity irrelevant if a smile lingered. Noblewomen might rally family support initially, but stuck rumors ruined prospects and children's futures. Peasant women fell faster, barmaids, widows, midwives, suspicion spreading like frost. Men faced leniency, squires scolded, maids marked, unless politically risky, like a baron exiled for poetry to a noblewoman, copying psalms to blindness. Italy's 13th-century shame lists named suspects, emptying stalls. Some fought back with pleas or hasty marriages, others fled. Reputation weaponized rumors to seize land or spouses. Scholars debate its long-term impact, ruining generations or fading pragmatically, but social death often outlasted physical. Alone, you embroider to steady shaking hands as maids' loud chatter and laughter hint at your name gossip. Love's danger pales beside its visibility. Alliances, security, peace, and name lost, rarely regained. On a mossy stone, day's last light fades, dirt under nails, salt on lips from tears or sweat. You've faced warnings and judgments, knowing love's a battlefield without swords. Yet it endured, quiet glances, dusk kisses, candlelit promises, unrecorded but vital. Peasants eloped, noblewomen forged papers, same-sex couples masked as friends, nuns buried together. A Prague couple lived 20 years unwed, raising a girl, defying labels. Endurance was sharing bread, feeding chickens, keeping secrets, recalling burned lovers, hidden letters, and defiant queens. Scholars question love's reality versus transaction, but its sideways persistence. Gestures, defiance, hope, shone. Brushing dust off, familiar footsteps approach. A moment without judgment proves love's survival, defying fear and fire, stitched into thrones, theology, and trembling hands. A muddy path littered with broken promises and charred letters also holds laughter, wax seals, and human glow. Love, unsafe but never irrelevant, filled medieval life. You recall the girl's wrong kiss, the scribe's untouchable dream, the knight's lettered heart. Monks, midwives, queens, outcasts, all brave. Tonight, amid a quiet storm, their courage inspires a story you now share.